Welcome, everybody, to part 5 of the Star Wisdom astrology course, which is going to be taught by Saturn. And this is my Saturn hat. What does it make you think of? Authority? Death, maybe? So, up until the mid 18th century, Saturn was considered the boundary of our solar system because we can see Saturn with the naked eye, but beyond that, we can't see Uranus or Neptune. So until the mid 18th century, and they discovered, lenses and were able to make telescopes, human beings had no idea there was anything beyond Saturn. And so Saturn was considered like the boundary of the solar system. And can you imagine, that was the case for, tens of thousands of years that people were watching the planets moving through the constellations, these traveling bodies moving through the constellations. And then suddenly in the mid 18th century, it's like, oh my gosh, there's another one beyond Saturn. Saturn isn't the boundary. You know, that corresponded with a massive change in psychology, in human nature. It corresponded to the church no longer being the ultimate authority. Saturn's very much to do with authority as well. It's the church was the authority, or the headmaster was the authority, or the government was the authority. And ultimately, death was the authority because everybody is going to die and you didn't know when. And so you were in the hands, in the lap of the gods, if you like, in terms of this authority, God, that would then determine when you were going to die. And Saturn represents boundaries. It represents our skin. It represents structure. It's like our skeletal system. It it represents teachers and masters, spiritual masters in particular, because Saturn used to be considered the head of the church, and the church was the head of society. So Saturn can feel very restrictive. It can feel very controlling. Like, I just want to break free and do my own thing and be adventurous. And it's like, no, you have to do what you're told. Saturn rules our monkey brain, that very animalistic, primitive brain that had to watch out for saber-toothed tigers when you came out of the cave, and therefore had to keep you safe. And so Saturn can be that little voice on your shoulder that's saying, no, don't do that, that's too dangerous. No, you better not do that, you might have an accident or whatever. So it can be really inhibiting in order to keep us safe. But that's quite low vibration. Remember, there's a whole spectrum that the planets can operate on, particularly the outer planets. And we do think of Saturn as one of the outer planets because it takes nearly almost 30 years to go around the sun through the whole zodiac. It spends about 2.5 years in each sign of the zodiac. So it's quite slow, and it impacts everybody for those 2.5 years. And anybody who is born within a couple of years or a year either side of your birth year will all have Saturn in the same sign. So all the slow, really slow moving planets, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, it's really worth looking at what level on that spectrum are they working at. So at very low vibration, Saturn can just feel so controlling and so restrictive. It's a bit like, it rules our body. And sometimes you can think, why won't my body do this? Why is my body limiting me? Why can't I go and run a marathon? Oh, my body won't let me do it. It's not fit enough. But at a very high vibration, Saturn is brilliant at organizing and planning. So if you do want to go and run a marathon, Saturn will say, right, so you need to set up an exercise program. So we'll start running a few hundred meters for the first week, and then we'll do, a mile for the second week, and it will program your progress so that you're ready for that marathon when it comes. And Saturn is brilliant for this. But it can take us a while to get to that point of using Saturn in this way. Saturn, as I said, takes 30 years to go through the zodiac, 29 and a half to be exact. So at age 29 and a half, everybody experiences what's called a Saturn return. It's where Saturn comes back to the place where it was when you were born. It can happen sometimes between 28 and a half and 30. And depending on whether it's just going direct, it just passes over your Saturn in one way, it can last for about 6 months. But if it goes in its retrograde motion back over your Saturn and then forward again, then it can last more like a year or even 18 months. And if you've got other planets associated with your Saturn, maybe a few degrees away, it can even last up to 2 years. And it can be very problematic for people. In fact, they say the quicker it passes, the more impactful it can be. There's quite a lot of people who don't even survive their Saturn return. Certainly, when I went through mine, I thought I'd gone mad. I was like, I didn't know who I was anymore. I became almost mute. And I didn't know anything about astrology at the time. And it was only when an astrologer said to me, how old are you? And I said, 29 or whatever. And they said, you're having a Saturn return. It will end. And yeah, one day I woke up and I thought, oh, I'm back to normal. It had passed, it moved on. And what happens is it's one of those maturity points, the Saturn return. It's like up until that point, we tend to be quite rebellious as young people. It's like, but I don't want to do what I'm told. I want to do what I want to do, and I'm not going to look after myself. I'm going to go and party and eat what I want, etc., etc. And then once we've had that first Saturn return, then we start to grow up a little bit more. And we go, okay, so maybe I need to work within these boundaries. Maybe I need to use Saturn to help me to achieve what it is that I want to achieve. And then we go through a second Saturn return at around age 58. But in my experience, that tends to pass by relatively uneventfully, unless you really didn't deal with your first Saturn return, and then it might come and bite you, that second Saturn return. So Saturn is about boundaries and structure. So I'm going to share my screen now. And if we look at our StarWisdom syllabus, you can see that Saturn sits in the self-identity because it represents our body, where the sun represented our mind, our mental level, the essence of our being. Saturn represents our physicality. And if you remember in the sun video, Saturn represents how we saw our mother figure. And it was usually our mother figure that was trying to keep us safe, that'd be teaching us how to cross the road or to tie your shoelaces or how to eat nutritiously. It was usually the mother figure, that looked after your clothes and made sure you were fed and got to school and things like this. So Saturn has quite a strong caring element, not caring in emotional caring, but more a physical caring, looking after. So Saturn sits in the yin zone of the learning circle, and therefore it's a technique that requires practice. It's like you have to keep doing this, keep looking at which planets are in a position of authority, and then really listening or really looking at the person whose chart it is or your own star map, and so that you really start to gain this experience of how to understand where this person is an authority. So what we're going to look at here is what planets are in their authority. It's like, where are we an authority in our chart? So this is the symbol of a Saturn. It looks a bit like a letter H. And you can see mine's right at the top of the chart in the 10th house. The MC represents the 10th house. So this is the house of career. Now, whatever house that Saturn is sitting in, it will bring limitations. It's a bit like, this is how we develop our authority. So the house of career, I was told when the astrologer discovered I had Saturn in the 10th house, oh, it might take you a long time before you know what your career is. And yeah, I didn't really actually start teaching astrology properly until I'd actually retired. I'd done all sorts of other things up until that point, but they all brought together a sense of authority. You know, I have experience in numerous other jobs, if you like, fields of work. I wouldn't quite call them careers, but I have a lot of experience in other roles. And so I'm able to speak with authority from that place. You know, coming to my career as an astrologer, you know, it's been a long journey. I've been teaching astrology for 30 years, but it's only in the past 2 years that I've actually come out as an astrologer and have created the StarWisdom course and teaching it. It's taken me a long time to get there. And whatever house Saturn is in, it takes a long time to develop that particular skill or to become really immersed in that particular life area, because it's like we have to test and trial, and we feel inhibited. We feel like, oh, I don't know if I want to go there, or we feel like we're told, no, you can't do that, you're not good enough. So there's all these restrictions that are placed on us in whatever house that Saturn is sitting on. And we have to go through this very methodical process of trialing something, see how that works, and what did I learn from that? And then we trial something else, and what did I learn from that? And then we trial something else, what did I learn from that? But in the end, we've had an incredible journey of learning, so that when we come out at the end of it, we can go, no, I'm an expert on that. I've just spent the last 30 years learning how to teach astrology. I know how to do it. I'm pretty good at it. This is what I've been doing. This is what I've been trained in by Saturn. And then Saturn rules the sign of Capricorn. So Capricorn is very measured. It's an earth sign. It's very practical. It's a cardinal earth sign, so it is initiating. It's willing to step up as a leader, a practical leader. And they tend to make quite good architects and teachers. And Saturn and Capricorn rule the 10th house, which we mark as the MC. So this is the authority. It's the highest point in the chart. So you can see that I have Saturn in its home house, if you like. It's its natural place to be. But actually, it can be quite problematic, not just because it's taken me so long to find what my career is, but because Saturn represents the mother figure, it can represent a very controlling and dominating mother. Now, my mother was a single parent. She had 3 daughters and she had to work full time. She had to keep us under control. You know, she wasn't there a lot of the time. She had to know that we were behaving ourselves and doing what we were told. And so there were a lot of boundaries put on us, a lot of restrictions put on us. But equally, she taught us to be very independent because she wasn't there to cook the food. She wasn't there to do the washing or the ironing or whatever. And we had to do those things. But in terms of that little voice sitting on your shoulder, it often sounds like your mother. No, don't do that. No, I really don't think that's a good idea. No, I think you should go and do something more sensible, more practical. Or have you done your homework? Now, I remember my mother, you know, when I had to revise for exams, you know, she'd make me create a timetable, you know, so it'd be so many hours a day and which subjects I was going to do in each of those hours. You know, it was this sense of planning and structuring and organizing my revision. And as a single parent, my mother had to teach us everything, you know, from learning to drive to learning to get dressed and look after ourselves and look after our physical bodies. But she had to teach us everything. But that sense of Saturn being in the top is quite controlling. Saturn actually prefers to be in the bottom of the chart. It prefers to be more like the roots, you know, the stability in the bottom of the chart, from which the young person can grow, rather than this dominating influence that is always trying to suppress and control. So Saturn is about authority. And what we're going to look for in this lesson is which planets have an authority, which planets are dominant in the chart. So what we need to do is we need to look at the star map and we need to look at the house cusps. Now, remember, the energy always goes anti-clockwise. So we're looking at these lines, the house cusps, which have a number or an IC or MC or whatever written on the top of them. And on the outside of the chart is the outer world. Okay, this is the outside world. The planets operate into the outside world through the houses. And then on the inside of the chart is the inner world. And we're going to look here at the balance point and the invert point in the next video for the moon. But for now, we're looking at these house cusps. And between the house cusps is what we call the energy curve. So on a house cusp, a planet that sits on a house cusp is very out in the world. The house cusps are the way out into the world. And any planet that sits on a house cusp or just after a house cusp is very visible in the world. It has a strong influence in the outside world. It has an authority. So if we look at my chart and we look at for where planets have a strong influence, you can see that I have Neptune right on the 9th house cusp. So Neptune is very out in the world. I'm just, you know, Neptune's a very spiritual planet, and I don't even have to tell people I'm spiritual. The majority of people just go, oh, they know I'm spiritual. And then I have the moon very close to the 6th house, just after the 6th house cusp. So again, my emotional being is very out in the world. I tend to reach out to people. I can connect with people at an emotional level. I can sense what is going on for people. It's very out in the world. And obviously, my own emotions are very visible to people. People often come up to me and they say, "You okay? You don't look very okay." And then my sun is just after the 2nd house cusp. So that's quite out in the world as well. And in fact, the sun, because it rules the mind, although I'm very watery, I can come over as quite mental, quite analytical in a way. And then finally, Uranus, although it's behind the DC, it's very close. And I really feel that my Uranus is very dominant in the world. And it has taken me, when we go into the moon video next, you'll realize that my Uranus is actually in what's called a stress zone. But I've had to work very hard with my Uranus because it's so visible to the world, which you'll see why in the next video. And so I really had to work hard at getting that Uranus up to the cusp, up to that DC cusp, the 7th house cusp, and take confidence in myself, because Uranus, is all about change and eccentricity and being unusual. And it's the first planet that people meet when they meet me, as you'll discover in the moon video. And so I've had to develop a confidence in that. I've had to really work hard to get that Uranus to become an authority, to be really visible in the world. So the homework, what I would like you to do is identify all the planets that are on a cusp, particularly those that are on a cardinal cusp. So that's the AC, the DC, the IC, and the MC. Those are the 4 really outward points in the chart, more so than the other cusps. And we're looking for planets that are on the cusp, or maybe just a fraction behind, or a little bit into the next house. Okay, so we're looking for those. And there won't be many, 2 or 3. Some people don't have any. So look for those planets and look at how other people see you, or if you're looking at somebody else's chart, how you see that person and the authority that they might carry quite innately. They're not necessarily talking about it, they just carry it as a sense of authority in that particular house. And I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.